What I'm going to do is talk about in-depth the UK studies. So, I mean, a lot of you here are going to be much more interested in the UK than the European-wide. Now, we're going to have slightly fewer cases, so there's fewer numbers, and we won't be going into industry-specific figures, because actually we feel at this level it's robust, and we've got some really good information coming out. So, like Miranda, I didn't get to go to Las Vegas and present this around the world. I haven't actually left Zone 2 to present this so far. But we shall see where we get to. So, for the UK case studies, we've got 34 cases where we've seen and measured the effect of cinema. Now that's out of a UK result vault of probably 500 cases. So we're probably slightly under-indexing, but all the studies we're looking at are these 34. So those 34 cases are proper econometric models spanning 3 years, often containing several cinema cases. So we can be pretty confident that those 34 cases are going to give us a good story and a robust story. You can also see how they've spread across industries. I put it up there so you can see sort of where the information's coming from. Are we, biasing towards one or the other? It's a fairly good mix across big advertisers. So actually the results should be fairly reflective of nearly any industry within the UK. If we start looking at just what is the total revenue ROI for those 34 cases, what we can see is that cinema comes in at number 3, slightly behind press and radio, at £2.84. So every pound invested generates £2.84 back in revenue on average. Now looking at this chart, it's quite interesting. The one question a lot of people say is TV. TV is usually the biggest media, and we know it's the biggest spender. What this is really coming out and showing us is in these 34 cases, it tends to be TV is over-invested in. TV tends to be into diminishing returns and thus decreasing that ROI. Whereas some of the other channels, print, radio and cinema, seem to be more optimal. They're using it at a better weight and, thus generating higher ROI. So it's an interesting mix. I mean, sometimes they're being used well and sometimes badly, but on average, you can see that there's a pattern coming out of there. If we go on to the mix, so what we've split here, we split those 34 cases into cases where they've used between 0 to 5% investment in cinema, 5 to 10% investment in cinema, and 10 plus. So, you can really put these down to people who are using a little bit of cinema, a middle amount of cinema, and probably using quite a lot. And the green bars here represent the cinema ROIs. So what you can see, if they use a small amount of cinema, the ROI is okay. It's coming in about 90p. If they're using 5 to 10%, it's much better. It's coming in about, £1.60. Good returns. And again, if they go over that, if they go over the 10%, big, heavy cinemas, there's a potential for diminishing returns. Over-investing, you're using wastage, and actually that's coming back down to 82p. So here what you're saying is really there is a sweet spot for the percentage of marketing investment to go behind cinema. And it's not a phenomenal amount, between 5 and 10%. That is a comfortable rate. That may change by industry, but on average across the UK and across the case studies we've got, 5 to 10% seems to drive the optimal cinema ROI. But not only that, the blue lines are the total comms ROI. So not just the ROI for cinema, but the ROI for all the media channels we measured in that econometric project. So again, if we're using a small amount, £1.62, but you move that amount to 5 to 10%, that goes up from £1.62 to £1.85. So that's a great sign of how cinema is helping drive other media channels. By having cinema in part of that mix, you've got a better overall mix, better synergies that is driving that high ROIs in that 5 to 10%. Okay, so it's kind of, if there was one number I'd want you to take out, it was 5 to 10%. Next time I look at media budget, 5 to 10%, does that go to cinema? But, why does that work? I mean, a lot of the studies we do, we don't always necessarily look at sales. We understand that the way media works is to work all the way through the purchase funnel. It first of all drives awareness, and then drives consideration, and then drives an action, whether that's a sale, a test drive, a visit to a store, whatever the business KPI is. And so what we do know, and in there, we've got a couple of case studies of how cinema drives along that funnel as well. So this is a case study from a major UK automotive. And what we looked at is actually how many awareness points did each of these campaigns drive per pound spent. So we've indexed it so you can probably not tell which car company this is. But what you can see is actually cinema per pound spent is driving almost, twice as much as your average TV campaign in terms of awareness. And that really kind of sits home. I mean, you know how cinema works. It's a very captive, engaging environment and does drive, that thought process, the mind process. And you compare that to TV. You know how TV works. You're not usually watching TV. You're playing the computer as well. So you can really see the difference in the numbers. And of course, if it's driving awareness, it's driving that purchase funnel. And that's what the econometrics is measuring all the way through that purchase funnel. In terms of ad stocks, now, carryover rates, I'm sorry, I use two different terms. Carryover rates. Now, carryover rates are really important to the effect of media. Some media are very instant and very easy to measure, but carryover is kind of that memorability of your campaign, the longer term effects. And it kind of leans towards actually longer and longer effects, driving more and more value. If you can affect 10 weeks rather than 1 week, your campaign's going to be 10 times effective. And just to give you an example, the difference between if everything else is the same campaign, if a campaign goes from 70% to 80%, that's going to double the ROI. So it really does make a difference. And so what we can see here in the UK study, TV is about 70%, whereas cinema is still very high, 72%. Some of the other ones, online, it's almost instant. You see it, you do it, then you forget about it. Radio, print, outdoor, still, they're very short term. But TV and cinema especially, is having that longer term memorability. But, of these 34 case studies, I probably have worked personally on 12, 15 of them. And what I wanted to do is drop a few notes about how to work with econometrics. A lot of people are starting to use ROI numbers as business metrics. So it's important that actually if you are planning campaigns, trying to do campaigns or analysing campaigns, that you make sure you put certain things in place so it can be measured. I said, actually, we've got a case study of 500 cases. We've only measured cinema in 34. And there are reasons for that. Sometimes it was planned at very odd times. So for us, it's best if things are flighted separately from other campaigns. So if you're planning to measure cinema, you've got to think about what the other environment's going on. You've kind of got to shout above the noise. There's a lot of noise going on. You've got to consider, well, is it a really good test bed, or should I do it at another time? And what I'm trying to say here is actually what to do is if you know econometrics is happening, talk to your econometrics agency. They can advise sort of how much weight should you put behind cinema in order to test it. When should you plan it? With the TV, 2 weeks afterwards, 2 weeks before? I'm not saying come to me, I'm saying talk to your econometrics agency. Another thing is to make sure the data's right. So many times I look at these econometric models, and the data that comes back is when you bought the campaign or a rough amount of cinema. But actually, if you feed the correct data to your econometrics agency, they're much more likely to measure it. If they got the right information coming in, they get the right information out, and that all leads to the planning, the right diminished returns, the right ROIs, and really builds the case study and story. And people at CAA are really willing to help with those numbers. So it's just joining the dots, making those connections, and making sure that it all flows right. But, one thing I would say is sometimes econometrics says not measured. Not measured doesn't mean a bad ROI. It's just for a statistical reason, we can't put down to one number. Could be £5, it could be £1. We just don't know. And if we don't know, it's not necessarily a bad number, it's just no number at all. A lot of people put it down to 0 and they put it into the average and say, well, we couldn't measure it, therefore it had no effect. It had an effect, we just can't quantify it. One important thing is econometrics will measure what did happen. So when you look at ROIs, consider, well, that campaign happened in this environment. Did it happen at the height of the recession? And so actually an ROI is the pure response. And there are a lot of things captured within that. You know, was it a very high costing campaign? Did it struck when there was a massive competitor launch at the same time? You know, so consider it. Look at the ROIs and really think about why that ROI happened with that amount. So yes, if you want a higher ROI, some very top tips. As I said, you know, if you're going to do it and you're going to try and test it, start it potentially at a different time from your TV campaigns. A lot of people launch at the same time, big launch, all campaigns. But, you know, actually think about trying to feed that funnel. Cinema's got that long ad stock, so start it early and it will have that memory when the TV launches. Considering upweights or downweights, so we're going to listen to James, who's going to talk about John Lewis. One of the big things we said there is actually, look, John Lewis, very south-dominated, you know, lots of stores in London and the south. Why not, you know, actually upweight the cinemas in those regions? It's much easier than upweighting or downweighting TV. I mean, buying TV in region nowadays is really expensive and really difficult. Whereas cinema, you've got a real good opportunity to match the footprint, the demand for the client. And if you're testing, be realistic, you know, make sure that it's a sensible level of cinema. Don't go beyond that 10%, don't go crazy. Start small and work up. Okay, so, as I said, a bit of a preview. I'm handing over to James Parham, account director at Menegotli, talking about how it does work for John Lewis.